Alright, trying this yet again, this time with the audio of the camera. Hello? Can you hear me? Alright, I'm gonna assume that it's just a case of the battery on my mic being out and that I just need to renew that battery, so get new batteries for it. But so I'm refilming today's video because the audio was crappy on the last one. It sounded like I was filming it underneath the shower or something like that. And the bad thing about it is that it's a wrap-up video. And so I spent so much time talking about these books in my last wrap-up and now I have to refilm it. So if things are a little bit snappier, then that is because I'm tired of talking about these books. I also no longer have a particular book to show, but yeah, I was only going to mention it for 5 seconds in any case. But so, welcome to my August wrap-up. The month of August was a mixed one. No, I had some good books. I had some meh books. I DNF'd a book. It was also a month in which I had a week off in which I went on holiday, and so I didn't get maybe as much reading done within that week as I normally would have. September is going to be the same. But so without further ado, let's dive into the books that I read in the month of August. So as always, I'll have 3 numbers up on the screen. You'll have my physical TBR up there. So these are all the books that I have physically on my shelf. At the beginning of the month, that number was 64, I want to say, but I haven't looked at those stats anymore in a while because I wasn't really expecting to have to do so. Second number up there is my credits. So I have a book buying credit system. Based on whether I read physical books off of my TBR, I can earn certain points. The amount depends on the type of book, for example. And when I want to buy a book, I need to use those credits to do so. And so at the start of the month of August, I had 5 credits left. And then the final number on there is just the amount of books that I read throughout the month. So that will count physical reads as well as ebooks, audiobooks. Any type of reading counts for that. So as always, I did a mid-month wrap-up as well, so I won't be talking in depth about those books. So if you want my full thoughts on those books, then I do recommend you check out that video, and those books would be Assassin's Quest, which I no longer physically have here with me. That was a library book, so it does not add or subtract from my TBR list. Augustus by John Williams. This is a book that I physically own, so it does subtract from my TBR. It's also a book that I put on my 12 books for 2021 video, and so it earns me more credits for having finished it, DNF'd it in this case. Reading Quirks. This is just an ebook, so it doesn't take away from my TBR and it also doesn't add to my credit system. And then finally, The Last Man by Mary Shelley. This was a physical book off of my TBR and I do get 1 credit for it. So those I all finished in the first half of the month, and then I will also now first talk about whether I added any books to that TBR or not. If you follow my channel, you know I already bought a lot of books in the month of July and that I actually shouldn't add any more books to my TBR because I added quite a few. I added about 5 or 6 or so in the month of July, so I shouldn't be buying more books. And I didn't really buy a book, but I saved one. A friend of mine was getting rid of a beautiful hardcover book, and who would I have been if I wouldn't have taken that little baby in? So yeah, I have a book to add, and that is The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gowar. Sorry, it's just too pretty. Look at that. Beautiful end pages. Cover is quite normal underneath, but it's too gorgeous. I don't know what this book is about. Maybe I should have figured that out before adopting it. So this is totally a cover safe. So yeah, this does add to my TBR, but it does not subtract from my credit system, so that's a kind of loophole that I hope not to be exploiting too much, because that is not the intention. But so yeah, this is another book that I saved from a friend, from the same friend who I saved a book from in July. So this friend is an enabler, a total enabler. But so, let's check it out. Let's see what we did in the second half of the month. Second half of the month, I started out by finishing an arc. So that doesn't add or subtract to my TBR. It doesn't add any sort of value to my credit system, but I'm still so happy that I did it because I'm so behind on finishing arcs. But so I finished After the Dragons by Cynthia Zhang, which came out on the 19th of August. And if you want my full thoughts on this book, definitely go and check out my review for it. I post a dedicated review for every ARC copy that I finished, and so I also did the same for After the Dragons by Cynthia Zhang. After the Dragons is a queer romance set in a fantasy future version of Beijing, China. It is a sort of environmental fantasy to some extent as well, because future Beijing is a Beijing that is very much affected by pollution. So pollution has really made its impact on this world and has made it so that there is this sort of chronic illness, fatal illness that is going around, and that is impacting one of our two protagonists in this story as well. The world might be fantastical in the sense that there are dragons roaming the streets of Beijing, but it is, apart from that, mainly a very realistic story. The fantasy elements are definitely there, and through the use of dragons we do explore certain thematics within the book, but the center and the focus of this book is way more realistic and is very much centering around this queer romance. So within this story we are looking at two characters. One of them is a Beijing native and the other one is an American who is coming over to Beijing for a couple of months, I think, to be part of some research program. They meet through circumstances. It's kind of a reluctant friendship to lover situations where one of these characters, the Beijing resident Kai, I think his name was, he is infected with this fatal illness that I told you guys about earlier, and he's kind of withdrawing from the world. He doesn't want to make connections. He has basically broken the ties with his family, hasn't really informed them where he is at, hasn't informed them that he's ill to begin with, and so he also doesn't want to enter into a friendship, and he also doesn't want to enter into any type of relationship with Eli, I think the name is of the other main character. And so even when it just comes to sympathy, he doesn't want any of that. He doesn't want to be helped by him. He very much rejects that. He doesn't want sympathy. He doesn't want the help of Eli because he feels like he's just doing it out of pity, and he doesn't want other people's pity, and part of it is also that he just doesn't want to accept it. He feels like if he accepts help, then he also accepts that this is actually happening to him. The story very much dives into this queer romance, but obviously it's also going to dive into thematics of terminal illness. I love this story. I felt like it had a very nice bittersweet atmosphere to it. I think it's a book that very much is suitable to readers of magical realism. If you are somebody who doesn't really like magical realism, then maybe still try it out, because maybe the aspect of the dragons is enough to get you invested in this story, even though it isn't focused on the fantasy aspect as much as it is focused on the queer romance. So it definitely does feel more like a realistic story with a fantasy setting than it feels like a fantasy story that is set in an urban setting, for example. So it kind of leans more towards magical realism in the experience of reading it than towards urban fantasy, for example. Next up, I finished Shadows of Self by Brandon Sanderson. I do have a dedicated spoilery vlog for this one, so if you've read Shadows of Self and you want more of my spoiler thoughts about this book, then you can also go and check that one out. But so in this one I will be keeping it spoiler free. Shadows of Self is the second book in Second Era Mistborn. So this is a fifth book basically in a series. If you want to dive into it, I definitely highly encourage you that you also read Mistborn Era 1, especially for the second one. There are a lot more tie-ins with Mistborn Era 1, and so it definitely makes more sense for you to have read Mistborn Era 1, especially since a lot of the things that are explored within this one that tie back to Mistborn Era 1 aren't really explained. So I already felt with book 1 that you needed to read Mistborn Era 1 to dive into Mistborn Era 2, and especially with this one I definitely feel the same. So this bigger tie-in with the original Mistborn sequence was kind of what I was hoping for when I ended the first book within the series, but sadly it didn't pan out the way that I wanted to, because as a consequence, I liked it less than I liked the first one. I think all of the elements that had kind of pleasantly surprised me about the first book were still there, but not a whole lot of new things were done with those elements, so I didn't feel like there was a whole lot of character development in comparison to the first book, for example, to latch onto for me. I felt like the relationships as they were established remained more or less static. And when it comes to the magic system, the exploration of the magic system, I didn't really see us diving a whole lot further into that. So I think what this book introduced is a bigger link with Mistborn Era 1, and as a consequence I actually ended up liking it less. And I think that that is kind of the same way that I feel about The Hobbit, the movie versions, for example, because I feel like in the movie versions of The Hobbit so much effort was put into tying it with Lord of the Rings, but it didn't reach the level of Lord of the Rings, and so I just felt like the Hobbit movies made me want to rewatch Lord of the Rings rather than continue watching The Hobbit. So with this one also I kind of felt like this book was making me want to read Mistborn Era 1 and wasn't making me want to continue this book or this series. So I struggled with this one, and so sadly it's not going great, Mistborn Era 2 for me. I knew going into it that it was probably not really my deal, but I was still hoping to enjoy it, and with book 1 I definitely enjoyed the ride a lot more than I was expecting to. This one was a little bit more of a struggle. Hopefully the third one, Bands of Mourning, is going to turn things around. Obviously, I do want to read all of them because I want to read all of the Cosmere books. There are a lot of connections. Bands of Mourning is going to introduce something that you need to know in order to read Rhythm of War, even though I already read Rhythm of War. So I do want to read all of these, and I am intrigued about, what is going to happen, but I don't think I'll ever be rereading this neither. And then the final book that I read in the month of August is The Lies of Lochlomora by Scott Lynch. This is the first book in the Gentleman Bastard series, and I really enjoyed this one. I wasn't really sure what to expect. I know a whole lot of people love this series and that it has a great friendship at its core as well, and so I was expecting great things, and I knew it was kind of heist plot, but that was basically all that I knew about it. I also had some misconceptions that it was more or less like pirate-centered, but people have corrected me that it's not this book, but the sequel to it, Red Seas Under Red Skies, that will have more piratey vibes. This one definitely has more like a Venice type of vibes. It's sort of like dark, gloomy, grimdark Venice. So in The Lies of Lochlomora, we're basically following this sort of thieving crew around the figure of Lochlomora as they try to pull off a major heist. But throughout the course of this story, they are pulled into a bigger heist that is happening, and this causes certain problems for them as well. I very much enjoyed the way in which the story is told in multiple timelines. So we have past timelines and present timelines. At first that was kind of difficult for me because I was in a holiday setting, there was a pool there were people jumping into the pool, there was noises, and so my focusing power at first wasn't as great, and so then constantly skipping back and forth was kind of disorienting me and making it more difficult for me to understand what the story was, what the characters were, what was actually happening, more difficult for me to focus on the story. But once I got thoroughly acquainted with the story and with these characters, I really started enjoying it a whole lot. I will definitely say it has a slower build, I think, than a lot of other fantasy books that I read, and slower in the sense that I even noticed that it's slower. A lot of times when people say it has a slow start, then I don't necessarily mind, and I also don't necessarily mind in this one, but it definitely took me quite a while to get into this one. But I will definitely say that I ended up really enjoying it. I really liked the way that it played out. What I really like is that there are real stakes, or there are really like challenges. A lot of times I feel like with heist plots in particular, it can sometimes feel as if the persons performing the heist have thought of everything and they're always one step ahead of everybody else. And while that is fun to read about in some sense, and it's fun to see, I do like Ocean's 11, for example, that uses that sort of plot device. It is also interesting to have real cases of them being thwarted, of them being put certain challenges that they hadn't foreseen, and them having to make their way out of it. And the way in which this story uses past and present timeline also made it really interesting to develop characters and to develop character dynamics. For first half or something of the book, you really dive into the character dynamics and the backstories of the thieving crew a whole lot, and as a result you get really invested with these characters, even though you might not be seeing a whole lot of their, even though there might not be a whole lot of depth behind their relationship in the present timeline, for example. So I thought that that worked really well. I will say that towards the end, the division between the two timelines really didn't work anymore as well, and it was kind of half abandoned, half not. we kind of through that past timeline explore a little bit more of sort of like backstory towards certain regions within the book and things like that, and that to me just didn't work as well. It kind of felt like a structural error to some extent that he wasn't able to use that sort of past timeline throughout the whole of the book the way he had done for a very big part of the first half of the novel. Another thing that I liked about the story is that it seems to be like not magical for quite a long time of its page count, and so none of these members of the crew themselves are actually magical, and then when magic is introduced it is basically an extra challenge for them because it's something that elevates the opposition, that makes the opposition that much more powerful than our thieving crew itself. And so I kind of liked and disliked that. I don't like magic to be that overpowering as it was the case within this one. However, because it is on the side of the opposition, I did find that interesting to see how big the opposition was, how they were up against like impossible odds to some extent. So I did like and dislike that to some extent. So I will say that when it comes to the character of Locke, for example, I'm not fully sold. I don't consider him to be like very exceptional, but I do very much love the relationships that are built within this one, and very eager to see how we will be continuing on with the next one. There are definitely a lot of groundworks that have been built for what is going to be coming next, and I'm eager to see where we go with that, because there are also side characters, for example, that have had a sort of introduction into what they will be doing in the second book, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing that because I really like those side characters a whole lot as well. But so yeah, that is the final book that I read in the month of August. That was actually a book that I get more credits for as well, because it was also on my 12 books for 2021 list, so making my way through that list very well. And so yeah, I had some really good books within this month, but I also had quite some disappointments. But you know, that happens, and so hopefully I'll just have a little bit of a better reading month in September in terms of, you know, loving most of the books that I read, rather than having this sort of like mix between nah, meh, and yeah, really loved it the way that I did this month. But so yeah, let me know if you've read any of these books. I know that quite a lot of you have read Lies of Lochlomora, because when I posted my TBR video for August, I already got some comments about that particular book. But if you've read any of these other books, then definitely also let me know, and then we can talk about them in the comments down below. But so yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. See you guys for the next one. Bye!